Hello, I'm Daniela Mellen. In today's class, we're going to continue with our fabric journal, and I'm going to show a fun technique for adding a disco curtain to your fabric journal. It's not really a disco curtain, but it's just a fun technique where you can hide something behind it and use different fabrics from your stash. It's full of texture, full of interest, and quite unique. So let's get started. So here's a fabric page idea that you might want to incorporate into your work. I just started here with this yellow page, and because this book tends to go by color, here's my green page, I'm just going to focus on yellow, and that kind of helps me to decide what I want to do, because then I go through my stash and I find a bunch of things with yellow in them. So right now I have my background, which is just this yellow fabric, and I think it's a beautiful color. So I threaded my needle with some yellow embroidery floss of a similar color. Now from here, I want to make like what I call a disco curtain. I can use ribbons or little fabric swatches, and they don't all have to be just yellow because a little contrast is nice. But I'm just going to do it on one side of the page here. So I'm going to just take my fabric and see what I think I want to use. I have some of the fabric that I put on the background, and I can use that. But I have this little gingham print, so I'll start with that. Just tearing a strip, and I like those kind of ratty edges. So I'll just set that down. I can either keep the pinking sheer top or snip that off, and I think I want it to be uniform, so I'll just snip that off. So I'm starting my curtain, and again I could use ribbons as well. Could even double the ribbon if I wanted to get that effect. I'm going to jump right here to this grosgrain ribbon. And again, I'll just continue with this with the different fabrics that I have. So I'm thinking about 5 strips I'll add. And this is kind of just a black and white strip, but I like the way that looks. It's a little bit off-white. Just got to remember to flatten it out. Then I'll add this one for my last piece. So I have my different strips of fabric. What I plan on doing is attaching them up top, and I'll put a little button, just because I found all these buttons in my stash, to hold it in place. I think that's a really cute look, and I'm going to let the bottom ends dangle, but I'm not going to attach the ends, just the top pieces here. So I can either attach them to the page directly, or I can take another piece of fabric and attach them to that fabric and then sew that to the page. I have a few options. I'm going to start by just sewing my fabric directly to the page, and I'll start at the end. I'll start at the swatch closest to the end here. So I make sure that I have my page set aside. Just going to put 1 stitch to hold the fabric in place up top, and then my next stitch I'll cover it with a button. So I pull that fabric and that thread through, and I have 1 stitch holding it in place. Now I know I have 5 pieces of fabric, and this button coordinates beautifully with this one, so I'll use that there. And now I can see which buttons I want to use. Can even go into the orangey colors as well. I'm going to start with this fairly good size yellow button, and I'll just set it down and thread right through it. Can go through it 1 or 2 times. I think I'll go through it twice just to really hold it in place. Then I'm going to switch to my next piece of fabric here, which is going to be this black and white piece. I just kind of eyeball that where I want it. Put my single stitch to hold it in place. And then I choose my button. I'm going to go with a more orangey button here. I think this one. It's still a little bit yellow. I'll bring my needle up through that. And I can just decide any formation that I want to attach that button to that fabric. And because it's 4 holes, I can just go through each of the holes. And then I'm ready for my next strip of fabric. And I'm going to use this thicker strip, this honeycomb fabric. And I'll continue this process with the remaining 3 strips of fabric. Holding that button down as I go. Sometimes getting that needle to find the right spot is a bit of a challenge. And then I'll just continue. Once I have all my buttons down, turn my page over, and I'll just knot my thread. So now I have my little disco curtain, as I call it. I want to trim the edges so that they're all more or less the same length. And to do that, I'm just going to pull each piece straight and just trim it right to the edge. Can leave some longer than others. So now I can decide if I want to bead the base of these little pieces of fabric. The hardest part I have is finding a needle that I can thread my fabric through, and then also that will go through the bead. So it takes a little finagling, but I can usually get it. And then I can either stitch it on, or I can just put a little knot at the end of this ribbon or fabric to hold the bead in place. I can pull that bead down just like that. It's kind of an interesting effect. If I wanted them to be longer, I would not have clipped those strips just yet. Well, I'll try this fabric strip then. There we go. I'll knot the end here. And so there on one side I have a cute little beaded curtain. I found these little pieces of embroidery, these little daisies that kind of coordinate. And I like to have something underneath the curtain. I'm not sure that's going to work for me. I might just clip these and stitch that down over here, and then figure out something for this side. So now I'll just take my piece and embroider this little daisy down over here. And I'll just go around that daisy to hold it in place. So now I have my little curtain here, I have my daisy stitched here, and I want to do something to this side. So I think I'm going to echo these lines using the fabric scraps that we have left over. So I'll move these beads out of the way. So I'll take some of these scraps and continue the theme of those kind of bars, but I'm going to switch the direction of the bars this time. So instead of being vertical, I'm going to have them horizontal. And I'm just going to do 3, I think. So I'll start with 1 and just move on. And just like with the curtain here, I'm going to have them different lengths. And I'll have 1 more. I can play around with the shape how I want it to be. Just like that. And I think I'll add a button just to tie it all in together. Just like that. So now I'll take my thread and just attach my pieces with just some simple stitches. I'll start by pinning everything in place. I'll pin all my fabric pieces in place so they stay where I want them to be. And I'm just going to use some white thread. I'll go around, stitching around the perimeter, and show you the results. So now I have all my patches sewn on. I kind of like the way that ties in together. And now I want to add the button. I can add the button here, or I can add a few buttons. And the more I think of it, I think I want to add a few buttons. I think that just coordinates quite nicely with this page. So I'll change that out, play around with the buttons. There, I have something that I like. Now I'll just sew those buttons in place. So now I have my completed page. So this page is ready to be sewn to this page. My book is starting to come together. I'll have more techniques in the future for you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining me.